Hi, welcome to another live stream with the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. The Global Network was created in 1992 to prevent the arms race from moving into space. You can support this show by clicking on the like button and subscribe to our channel so you get notifications when we have new shows come out. And also be sure to check out our website at spaceforpeace.org. Today, we're going to speak about this topic. Why is the US-NATO rushing into war with Russia and China? Our guest this time is John Walsh, who's a peace activist in the US and a writer. And we thank Global Network board member Will Griffin for doing the tech work to make this show possible. So, John, welcome to the show, and please tell us where you live and a bit about yourself.
Okay, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area on a little island called Alameda, and I've been an anti-war activist and also an activist on the question of single-payer healthcare for decades. I even ran for Congress twice it was a fool's errand, more or less. I had lots of support, but I didn't have $1 million worth, so it didn't work out. And I actually was on the faculty of the University of Massachusetts Medical School. I was a research scientist, a basic scientist there for my whole career, and retired here recently to the Bay Area. So I guess I'm probably like you, a person who came to the anti-war movement in the Vietnam War generation.
That's right. Well, again, we're glad to have you here. Let's begin with a discussion of the origin of the policy for the U.S. drive for hegemony, for global control and domination. You want to respond to that, please?
Yeah, there's one statement. I guess we can. It's nice to have a principle to look at when this question is raised, and because every time the United States starts out on a new war, people are trying to figure out, what the heck is going on, and are we in the right, are we in the wrong, etc. And I think a lot of attention has been drawn again to the Wolfowitz doctrine. Andrew Bacevich had an article on it recently, based on actually a front page article in Harper's. And I think it's a good place to start. So let me read a couple sentences because I have it here before me. Wolfowitz says way back in 1992 that we endeavor to prevent any hostile power from dominating a region whose resources would, under consolidated control, be sufficient to generate global power. In other words, no other global powers but the US. And then he concludes, we must maintain the mechanism for deterring potential competitors from even aspiring to a larger regional or global role. So that's the Wolfowitz doctrine, but it's not new. And I think that's another thing. It is not just the doctrine that's put into practice by the neocons like Victoria Nuland or Wolfowitz himself, or any of a number of others, and who dominate the Biden administration's foreign policy. It's a policy actually that goes back to just before World War II in 1941, actually. And there's a wonderful book, I'm even going to hold it up, that documents this called Tomorrow the World, The Birth of U.S. Global Supremacy by Stephen Wertheim. And he was at the Quincy Institute when he wrote this. And basically, in 1941, the newly born infant Council on Foreign Relations looked out over the world, and representing the East Coast foreign policy establishment said, look what's going on in World War II. When this is over, all the other major industrial powers in the world, other than us, will be laid waste. They'll be all of them will be prostrate. So what that means that we can emerge as the power that can dominate the globe, and this we should do. And now where the roots of that go, we can, missionaryism, crusader culture, etc. That's even deeper. But there is where it starts. Up to then, the United States was apparently, as far as the history tells us, a sort of a garden variety imperialist power, but this was something new. This was, as the title of the book goes, Tomorrow the World, the birth of US global supremacy. And that policy was reiterated after World War II by George Kennan, who said, we're 6% of the population. We have over 50% of the world's resources. Our job is to keep it that way. And then there's the Wolfowitz Doctrine. And all along the way, we see the actions of the United States fitting in to that goal. And so it is no mystery. And now the United States, to go to your question, the present circumstance, the United States is confronted with one power in particular, China, which has not only aspired to be a regional power, it is a regional power, and it not only aspires to be number one, but in terms of purchasing power parity GDP, it is number one. It has outstripped the United States as of 2017. So the United States' worst nightmare has come true, and the job of the United States now is to reverse that. It has lost that place, and I think it's in somewhat of a panic to restore it. And I think that accounts for a lot of some of the somewhat, like you said, insane actions, apparently insane actions of the United States. One thing about that policy, which I like to emphasize in terms of in humanitarian or moral terms, it is extraordinarily cruel, because the United States has it now has a PPP GDP slightly smaller than China's, but let's say it's about the same right now. China has a population 1/4 of that of the United States. And in that sense, it's a developing country. It has a large middle class, 400 million, but the rest live below that line. And to bring them up above that line, you have to think about it. To bring it on a par with the United States, its GDP would have to be 4 times that of the United States, maybe 3 times if they could do it more efficiently than what we do it. But still, much larger than the United States. So what the job of the United States now is to bring down China, to re-impoverish China, almost 20% of the world's population. And that gets reflected in other things too. The cruelty of it can be seen in the sanctions against Russia, which are meant to impoverish it, bring it down. So this is an extraordinarily, and it applies to the whole planet. So anybody, and you can see this too in the recent meetings in G7 and so on with the United States versus BRICS meetings with led by China, BRICS being Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. That G7, what are they talking about? They're talking about sanctions. They're talking about wars. They're talking about alliances. However, on the other hand, what are they talking about at BRICS? They're talking about development. They're talking about infrastructure. They're talking about better trade. They're talking about ways to improve the standard of living. It is the destructive nature and the cruel nature of the U.S. and Western policy is such a stark contrast to what China is doing.
This would explain then why the US and NATO are pushing so hard for an expanding war with Russia, and then they've added China to their list of countries they want regime changed. It appears to me to be suicidal, and it could go nuclear. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that, and I think the more important of the two is going nuclear. I mean, this is where people are approaching Putin for saying, if our very existence is threatened, watch out, we might use nuclear weapons. and although maybe no one wants to put us in that position, two things make me very frightened. Number one, both countries have their nuclear weapons, Russia and the United States, on hair trigger alert. And so in a moment of crisis, mistakes can be made. There are only seconds, minutes actually, to make a decision. And we know from the past, from Cold War, Cuban Missile Crisis, and other examples, that the mistakes very nearly were made. So that's very dangerous. The second thing is, in the recent New York Times editorial, Biden said, we will not attack Russia unless they attack us or one of our allies. Now, that means that anybody who wants to mount a false flag operation, and there are plenty of people in the world who would like to, and I believe from some in our own administration and some in Europe, in Poland, in the Baltics, one false flag operation, and we're in. So we are not even in control. And this gets back to NATO, which is, as the founder said, an entangling alliance. We're not in charge of our own fate. This is a very, very scary situation, to my mind. I think it has to be stopped right away.
Yeah. Well, that's.
You asked another thing about, why, Henry Kissinger was sort of giving, I guess, Biden administration a lesson in diplomacy, geopolitics 101 at the Davos conference, and saying, what are you doing? You're fighting both enemies at once. You should never do that. But I think with the United States, part of this is that they think they can do it, because I think World War II, again, is maybe what's in the back of their mind. If they can get the East Asians to fight the Chinese and get the Europeans to fight the Russians, then, hey, we stand back as the arsenal of democracy, take very few blows, and come out on top.
But the way
feeling that if that Russia and China together are not beatable, and Russia's the weak link, maybe they can eliminate that. So that's as far as I can guess what they're thinking. Of course, they could just be insane, as you say.
Yeah. But, the way the Western sanctions are backfiring and smacking Europe more than anyone else, that idea that Europe would be much assistance in a war with Russia kind of goes out the window, because you need energy to run a war. You need energy to power your armament factories, right? Europe wouldn't, they wouldn't have the energy to do much of anything.
Well, that's true. I don't think that they really understood. The United States really, I think, that in the economic war, and this has turned out in its first in its openings here, in economic war, that Russia would collapse. I don't think they understood that. I think they felt, maybe we'll take a minor hit, but I don't think they understood that Russia was so resilient. And it's clear that Russia planned for this for years. Well, since they couldn't get the Minsk agreements, so it goes back way back to 2015. I think they've prepared, and the ruble certainly is not rubble, as Biden said it would be. It's I think it's 5-year high now or something like that, trading in the 50s.
Well, let's go a little deeper. Explain your view on the conflict between the global South. Most of the countries of the world didn't join the sanctions, especially those in the what's called the global South: Africa, Middle East, Latin America, etc. So the conflict then between the global South, led by China, versus the US, where does Russia and Ukraine fit into that equation? If you know,
I
if
think
you say that China is the real target, so to speak, how does the war between Ukraine and Russia fit into that?
well, as I say, I think it's the idea that you might. As I say, it could either be the idea of a replay of World War II, World War II redux, as I called it in one article, or it could be that they feel they have to knock off the weaker link first, and that would be Russia. But I think the real mistake, the way we view this, I think, is somehow out of whack, because if you read, if the principles in this conflict are or competition are China and the US, then I think what properly the United States should regard Russia as a prize. Russia is a prize in this conflict, because if you look at, especially to China, look at the economies, in the wheat, gas, oil, fertilizer. Russia's one of the principal exporters in the world. China's one of the principal importers, 1, 2, or 3 in each case, number 1, 2, or 3. So Russia is a big asset, is a big, it's, and I don't think, I'm surprised, but I don't think that really was appreciated. I think people convinced themselves that Russia was a gas station, trying to imitate a country. And so you can get caught up in your own fake ideas. We've all seen that. And so that's one problem. But Russia is not just a prize economically. To me, it was a little bit, I was surprised when India refused to join the sanctions. I thought, geez, maybe. And, I can see several reasons for that, because according to the Wolfowitz doctrine, if China is brought down, who rises to number 1 on the list? Well, who's the number 3 GDP country in the world? Is India. That's really not in India's interest for China to be brought down, at least not at this point, and I don't think ever. But so did Russia's long-time good relationship with India help out there? Is Russia's not only, and I think it did, I think Russia's not only a diplomatic, not only an economic prize, but a diplomatic one too. And also in places throughout the developing world where China doesn't have the best relations or close relations, Russia does, because in the Soviet era, it was the big helper to the decolonizing world, and that's remembered, and links were forged, as with India. So the big prize was lost. It's not just a gas station masquerading as a country. It was the great prize in this initial battle between the global South and North, and it was lost.
Let's go to 2014. The Obama administration was in power in Washington. The U.S. orchestrated the coup d'etat in Kiev in Ukraine, putting into power a right-wing government that was backed up by the muscle of these Nazis who historically predominate in Western Ukraine near the Poland border. Since the coup happened, 14,000 Russian ethnic citizens in the Donbass region and the eastern side of the country, right along the Russian border, 14,000 have been killed and 34,000 wounded, largely by this civil war against of the west of Ukraine against the east of Ukraine. But most importantly, backed up by the power, the money, the weapons of US, UK, and NATO. A friend of mine has a son who's a US Army Special Forces troop assigned to Fort Carson, Colorado. And units from there were repeatedly sent to Western Ukraine to a base where the US and NATO were training these Nazis, who were then sent on to attack their fellow citizens in eastern Ukraine. You mentioned earlier the Minsk Accords. This was the agreement that Germany and France and Russia helped foster along with Belarus, trying to end the civil war, saying there would be a federated Ukraine, a Ukraine where the people in the eastern part of the country could speak their own language, Russian, and would have local autonomy. But the president at that time who signed them recently made a statement saying, well, we didn't ever intend to honor the Minsk. We just tore them up, you know. We were just stalling for time, trying to build up our military so that we could take these people down. So do you believe that in the end, the people in the Donbass, these Russian ethnic citizens living near the Russian border, did they have a right to defend themselves against this US, UK, NATO proxy war in Ukraine? Or as many peace people say, no, Putin made a mistake. He shouldn't have gone into the country in February of this year. He shouldn't have gone in there. What other alternative do you see that Putin had other than this special military operation, as he calls it?
Well, I guess what people are saying is that if he felt, well, there are two aspects to that. The people, the Russian-speaking population in the Donbass, and then there's NATO expansion. To deal first with NATO expansion, Putin has been saying since 2007, at least, after he got Russia off its back, which after being thrown into essentially a Great Depression by the U.S. Interferences in the 1990s, you know, he's been begging NATO not to expand to the east. He said this is going to be an existential threat. Again and again, pleading, asking for treaties, asking early on to join NATO, anything. That's called diplomacy. And he tried it from 2007 at least, probably 2004, until 2015. That's a good 20 years, close to 20 years. That's a lot of diplomacy before he acted. To remove what he thought was an existential threat to Russia. But now the Donbass, I think, is very interesting because I think a lot of pacifists in the peace movement, and peace is fighting for peace and struggling for peace is not the same as pacifism, are opposed to what Putin has done because essentially he fired the first shot. You know, that's what it comes down to. He initiated a war.
Well, not really, though. If you look at the go ahead.
And that's what I said. I agree with you that in fact, even on that basis, he did not. And even if the first shots were fired by the Ukrainian government that we installed when they fired on the Donbass in 2015. Now, you know that counts. That was killing, as you point out, thousands and thousands of Ukrainians, Russian-speaking Ukrainians, who regarded themselves as at least as much Russian as Ukrainians, were killed. So that's the first shot. And if you go to Wikipedia and you look at the Russian, you look up Russia Ukraine war, even Wikipedia says it began in 2014 with the shelling of the Ukraine. But that part of it is quite amazing. Highly educated people who read the paper and watch the news every day, don't even know about it. That part of the narrative. Now, in peace circles, people know about this, although at the beginning of the war, many of them didn't know about it either. More are learning now. So that part of the narrative has been completely, in the popular mind, completely obliterated. And it's only beginning to come to the surface now. So I think, this has, and it's kind of interesting that since the 1990s, the United States has invoked the right to protect in various cases. Well, Putin is protecting a Russian-speaking population from getting killed. And what happened to the right to protect? Suddenly it's gone, because that's our right. That's nobody else's right. So there's a tremendous hypocrisy. So go on.
Well, that's a really interesting point you make there about the right to protect. Well, let me ask you this question here. So kind of following on with the points you were just making, are you at all surprised then at how divided the peace movement, not only in the United States, but also in Europe, has been so divided, although it appears lately to be changing a bit? Maybe it's because, as you say, people that didn't really follow the story so much in the beginning are learning more about it. They're beginning to see that there is a role of the Nazis. Some people, even to this day, still deny that there are any Nazis involved in Ukraine. They say Zelensky's Jewish. How could there be any Nazis, involved? So please comment on that, the division within the peace movement.
Well, the major problem I find with the peace movement is that very often peace movement begins its statements that we condemn Russia for this horrible, brutal war, but we oppose our government for getting involved to stop Russia in this brutal, horrific war. So once you start out with that initial statement, once you concede that, once you buy into it for the sake of credibility, the sake of whatever, you've lost the argument. I mean, that's you've handed to the opposition, to the imperialists here, or better, I should call them hegemonists. The hegemonists here, you've handed them the whole game. So I think that is a tremendous strategic and tactical error. The fact of the matter is that at the simplest level, there's war and killing going on. When we speak up, we can affect our government. That's all we can affect. Nobody in Russia is listening to what we say, but politicians, as our voice gets louder, they're listening. They have to listen. There's a lot of opposition, both on left and right, to this war. There were 68 votes on the GOP side, and this is very significant against the latest tranche of support, military and non-military, to Ukraine. So this, if in practical terms, like Jean Bricmont, the author of Humanitarian Imperialism, he said, when very often when people, humanitarian imperialists are speaking, they say, oh, we're just, we're out for humanitarian aims. But he says, who are they speaking to? Who is their audience? Who hears them? Who can they affect? The answer is our government, not those governments over there. So I think, and I think, we recently had a demonstration at Barbara Lee's office here, criticizing her for her vote on the recent $40 billion in military and non-military aid to Ukraine. And it was very good. It was a very good demonstration. It was much bigger than we thought we would get. And we stuck to the idea of what can we do to stop the war? And what we can do is to get our government to stop pouring flames on the fire. It can be that simple. You don't have to get into all the rest. So that's one way around it.
And Barbara Lee she was one of those that voted in favor of, it's now $54 billion, as I recall,
yes.
that has been appropriated from the bankrupt United States Treasury to go to Ukraine. All Democrats in the House and the Senate voted yes on that $54 billion. As you said, it was the Republicans, particularly in the House, that voted no on it. That's quite an amazing thing. Well,
Well,
John,
I should say, there's no time to go into this really, but I should say that more needs to be looked into more carefully, because there is an anti-interventionist on the right, an anti-interventionist sentiment on the right. It's dismissed or smeared as isolationism, but it is something that we should work with and cultivate and encourage, because you can call it America first, you can call it isolationism, but it basically is anti-interventionism, and we should try to work with it.
I would call it libertarian, but I agree with you 100%. Thank you, John, for coming on the show. And thanks for watching another edition of Space Alert. We'll be back next month with another show and another leader from the peace movement from around the world. In the meantime, good luck to you all, and please get organized. Be sure to